I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we started Tesla. And it is a mission-driven company. So in the 90s, Martin Eberhard and I started a consumer electronics company. And it had a mission in its own way, which was largely around us having a really good time learning about publishing and meeting lots of authors. And it was great. But we sold that to TV Guide. And after that, we really wondered about what to do next. And after the sort of nuclear winter of the dot-com fallout, in 2003, we decided to start a new company. And we wanted something, though, this time that actually had a little bit more of a real mission. And in this case, we picked oil. Now, oil sounds really big, but the neat thing about it is it's got lots of problems all wrapped into one. There's a lot of issues around oil. At that time, global warming was a little bit less, little less understood, but certainly global warming was a big issue. There's this idea of resource depletion and what the society is going to do if we run out of oil. There is the economic burden of oil. If you look at how energy flows and how oil flows, it distorts a lot of the economic potential of the world. And then I used to live in the Middle East for years and years and years. And anyone who believes that oil is not one of the central issues in the Middle East, I think just hasn't been there, because it dominates the mental space. So we decided oil would be a great thing, and our intuition was electric cars were probably going to be the answer. But we wanted to make sure that that had impact. And to do that, we looked to see, well, where is oil used? We wanted to make really sure that if we did something like an electric car, that it would actually it'll move the needle in some way. And it turns out that almost all oil, at least in the industrialized world, is used for cars, basically, or transportation, most of which is in cars and light trucks. So we felt that if we could solve that, that would have a big impact. If we went for electric generation, it wouldn't make any impact. It's only 1%. There have been EVs for a really long time. In fact, we made a point of naming all of our conference rooms with the names of failed electric car companies from the early 1900s. And these are marvelous ads for ladies who lunch and so forth. It was just a different, more Victorian time. Our intuition as engineers was that battery electric was going to be the best technology to get us off oil. But we had to make sure that that was really the case, because what we didn't want to do is have a product be years down the line and then discover that biodiesel was really the correct answer. And they would come at us and say, why did you spend all this time doing electric cars? You should have been doing this other thing that was so obvious. So we did a deep dive on sort of every possible technology that was around. And I'm not going to go into the details of this, but hydrogen fuel cells were big at the time. And we looked at the absolute best, most theoretically, most awesome efficiencies in hydrogen fuel cells. And if you could do that, you still can, existing electric cars or existing technology, you get to go about 3 times more efficient than hydrogen. So we figured hydrogen's never going to be, because it's only about 10% as efficient of electric cars now. And even if it gets to its theoretical max, it's still only 1/3 as efficient as electric cars. Ethanol, another big issue at the time and still kind of around. And you can make that from just biomass. And there's lots of fancy ways of taking biomass and making it into liquid fuel. And in fact, the VCs were investing in that at the time. When we looked at that, though, if we just took the same ton of biomass and didn't use any fancy new stuff and just simply burned it in a General Electric generator, we could drive twice as far without any new technology. So that wasn't going to be a problem. Corn is used in this country as fuel. We are the only country on Earth that uses corn as a fuel, largely due to electoral politics. But we're really, really good at growing corn. So we thought, well, shoot, you can get about 2,300 miles an acre out of corn. What would that do? Maybe we could just grow our way into fuel independence and get rid of all the oil. So that's the map of the United States. That's how much arable land we've got. And if you planted it all in corn, we could offset about half of our driving. Now, we'd import 100% of our food. So that didn't seem like, so we said the corn thing really is just politics. It's not going to knock us out of the marketplace. Vinod Khosla was investing heavily in a different kind of ethanol production with switchgrass. And it never came to these numbers that he'd hoped for. But we thought, well, maybe that might work. It's still about, 1/4 of all the arable land would be used for 50%. But we thought about that acre of land. And that acre of land, if you put it in the desert and use photovoltaics, you could go like 32 times further with an electric car and not have to invent anything. This was all, like very understood technology. So no matter how we did it, even if we drove the electric cars entirely with legacy coal plants, it was still more energy efficient than the best possible gasoline cars. So we were convinced that electric cars really were the thing that was going to move us out of the fossil fuel era. And obviously, you don't need to use fossil fuels at all. So we looked at the potential market then. Like what, people buy lots and lots of cars, even in the US, like there's millions and millions of cars being built. And the market we ended up focusing on was a sports car market for reasons I'll talk about in a second. And even that's a $3 billion a year market in 2003. We thought this is going to be great. The problem is that there were no electric cars that were selling. Now, there were electric cars on the market, but they were not selling. So EVs in 2003 were not doing well. And for some reason, these cars were just not, these are all real. These are all actually real cars. These were not entering the marketplace with any sort of success. And the conventional wisdom was, well, nobody likes electric cars. I mean, look, they're not selling. I mean, like, really? So there were electric cars, however. There were better electric cars. And those better electric cars were created because of the zero emissions mandate. And that zero emissions mandate required car companies to make electric cars if they wanted to sell real cars, real meaning internal combustion engine cars. And the politicians, they built this. They thought this would be a good idea for California for air quality reasons. But it turns out that you can spend money building electric cars, or you can spend money in Sacramento, and they got the zero emissions mandate repealed. And when they did that, all these electric cars were taken off the market. And the only two that were any good was the Toyota RAV4 and the General Motors EV1. The Toyota, because Toyota doesn't do anything half-assed. No matter what they release, it's always good. So all these cars were leased. And as CEOs, you should think about this. So your customers have leased these cars. Some of them love them. The Toyota customers loved their cars. The General Motors customers loved their EV1s. They canceled all the leases. And Toyota, the customers said, oh, please don't take our cars away. And Toyota was like, wow, you really like our product? Sure, you just buy out the leases, have the cars. GM, however, decided to crush all of the cars, take them all back from their loyal customers and crush them. Now, don't do that. Okay, is my thing. If your customers love your product, don't take them back and crush them. Like, this is not, but GM is a different place. They did have a point though, is that it didn't really appeal beyond a very small market. In this case, it was tree huggers and geeks, is what they said. And this quote actually freaked us out a little bit because we are tree huggers and geeks. Martin and I, that's, maybe we were it. And for a lot of different reasons, though, we didn't believe that. And I won't go into the details of that. We did a detailed market study on who was buying what. And we were pretty sure that customers would respond to an electric car if it was the right electric car. So we did a model. We said, what was technically possible? What could we do? And we used essentially just spreadsheets in high school physics, because this isn't rocket science. That comes in later, but this isn't really rocket science. And what did it tell us? It told us that first off, it works. So this is the amount of solar energy that you need to offset 14,000 miles of driving, which is the average in California. And when we saw this, it just didn't look that hard. Like there's not that many solar panels, and you never need to use any oil at all. You're completely energy independent at that time. The other thing is you could really have fun. Electric cars are inherently quick. They accelerate like nothing you've ever experienced. They're the most high-performance cars that you can do. And at this time, 0 to 60 in 4 seconds was about as good as you could get. And so we thought, well, we can beat that. We can at least do that well. We can be the fastest sports car that is possible. And we were really intent on that because we wanted to make sure our product was better than the existing products out there. Just because it's going to save the world isn't good enough. It really, really has to be better than what's out there. People will only put up with something that isn't as good to save the world for a short period of time, and then they're like done, and they want whatever the latest shiny object is. So in 2003, we incorporated. We beavered away on trying to figure out exactly how we were going to deal with our customers, how we were going to make production, because we knew how to make the electronics. We figured that's our world, that's Silicon Valley's world. But how are we ever going to be able to make the car part? Are we going to make partnerships, and how we worked on that? And a ton of other stuff. It was just this endless stream of problems. But not problems, challenges. And then we wrote the last business plan ever written in Silicon Valley. Because nobody does that anymore, but we were kind of old school. We thought, let's just do this. And we went off to raise money. Now, raising money for something like an electric car company in 2004 was kind of crazy. And so we went around and we got money from 2 small venture firms, SDL Ventures and Compass Technology Partners. But we were still looking for a lead investor. And then we ran into Elon. And at that time, he had just founded SpaceX. So he's building rocket ships. And the great thing about pitching a crazy company to somebody who's building rocket ships is Elon said, he's like, oh, electric sports cars, no brainer, and invested. And it did occur to us. We thought, I wonder what kind of company pitches he looks at and goes, whoa, that's too crazy. I don't know. We've always wondered about that. Anyway, so we had money. We're off to the races. We started hiring people. That's JB Straubel on the right there. He's the current CTO still. He was like employee 5 or whatever. We started a mule. And so one of the big things is that we had some technology risk. We didn't have any science risk, but we had engineering and technology risk, particularly around our battery pack. We had a really innovative way of doing the battery pack. So we wanted to build that first, to retire that risk and get that out of our world. So we built a mule. And in the car industry, a mule is where you take parts of one car and parts of another car and you slam it together to test something. It doesn't reproduce, is why it's called a mule. So it's just for testing. And there's our test mule. We began designing our systems. We designed, and that's us dropping the first battery pack, our first Tesla designed battery pack into the mule for testing. Did styling design, had stylists working on it. And then we finally had a car that ran. It was a mule, but it tested out our battery pack, and we could show it. Now, remember, we raised money before. This was a big milestone. So we immediately raised more money. We had something sexy to show. People got in it. They were like, whoa, the board was so impressed. Immediately raised more money. It's a good thing to always be raising money like that. Started working clay. And this is actually clay as well. This is clay that has had a mylar wrapped around it to make it reflective. Lots of aerodynamic designs and stuff you can only do in full scale. And then we had to make our own motors, which was not in the original plan, but it's the way it worked out. And by April of 2006, we thought we knew what we were doing. And so we decided to make some engineering prototypes. Pencils down, all the engineers stopped. Everything was production intent. And we built 10 of these things. And then we did all the regular product testing that you would, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped a slide. So then it came off the line, and these are beautiful. These are so nice. This is what the car is really going to look like. Now, we're still in stealth mode. Nobody knows what we're doing. We had these beautiful things, so we immediately raised more money. Because people would look at them and go, whoa, I get this. I understand now the mission of the company. I understand the product of the company. We also took those vehicles and tested them like crazy. Oh, shit, the slides here are out of sequence. So, we also then revealed our public launch. So we came out into the public, and we had a big party down in LA. And that was really fun, and the governor, who was Schwarzenegger at the time, showed up. And our car is pretty small, and Schwarzenegger, he's kind of big, at least on the screen. And so I was really worried he wasn't going to fit. But it turns out he's actually not super tall, but big, like this. Oh, thank you for fixing the slides. So we tested the hell out of those engineering prototypes. And there's a whole process that's defined for cars. It's just like the product marketing or product testing that you would do at any consumer electronics. It's just a lot more complicated in the sense it's got these durability tracks all over the world and crazy, ice tracks and everything else. But it's a known thing that one does to cars. And at the end of that, thousands of changes come into the design because parts are flying off your car like crazy. That's bad, but it's great. So at the end of that, so a year later, we now had these thousands of changes, and we built 10 validation prototypes. And these validation prototypes are really actually what we're going to sell. And then we do the same tests on those, and it better just pass them all, which it did. So you might guess, we had these beautiful cars come off, and these really were beautiful. The doors sounded like a Mercedes, ka-chunk, it was awesome. So we, again, immediately raised money, as much as we possibly could, because things were getting much more expensive. Production was beginning on the motors, much to our kind of dismay, but it was working out the way it was. We had some transmission problems, which, if those who follow the history of the company, nearly sank the company. And in fact, at this point, we are now really behind schedule. Our customers have been waiting a really long time. We're having these huge supplier problems, and our transmissions are not working very well. And the transmissions were not our technology. We had just bought them off the shelf, which was not what we just never expected that would be something that would not knock us over. And Martin quite famously gets ousted as CEO, my co-founder. And Michael Marks, who is had been the CEO of Flextronics, he's great. He came in as interim CEO and helped us through this production bottleneck that we were having, this production problem. And we finally had these production cars, and there was our 0 to 60 time at under 4 seconds. And this was totally production car. And to me, it is the most amazing thing that you can sit there with a spreadsheet, and math is so powerful of a predictor that you end up, 5 years later, ending up with something that runs down the road exactly like the spreadsheet tells you. It's just, math is so bizarre that way. However, we still didn't have anything that really worked in production. The transmissions were a complete failure. We were using the world's largest or second largest transmission manufacturer. We thought they would know how to make transmissions. That was a mistake. And we had to completely redesign how we were doing that. This was not a good time. Michael had to go off and do his own thing, and the board picked a new CEO, Zev Jory, who had been at Monolithic Memories. He'd been the founder of Monolithic Memories, which was, I'm sure he was great there. It was not a very good fit for Tesla, I didn't think, but we were not doing well. January of 2008, we're max employees at the time. We've passed everything that we needed to. There's a ton of regulatory things around cars. Everything, Europe, America, we can sell cars like no problem, except we can't make them go because the transmissions are still being redesigned. This was an expensive funding round because we were going to run out of money otherwise. And if you notice the date, this is just the beginning of the financial crisis is beginning to start. So the world is getting kind of weird financially, and people are feeling it. They had nothing. So it was a hard time to raise money, but fortunately, all of our existing partners came in and literally saved the company. And by June, we were actually delivering cars. And that was a very big deal. In fact, several of these people now that are in this picture are CEOs of their own companies, which I was noticing that this morning when I was looking at the slide. And we had happy customers. And ultimately, you've got to have happy customers. The product has really got to resonate with the customer. Otherwise, you don't have a business. No matter how wonderful the vision is and no matter how meaningful the mission is, it's got to have happy customers in the end. So in October, the board also decided that Zev perhaps wasn't as good of a fit for the company as they originally had thought. And Elon takes over as CEO, and he was the perfect fit. And despite some of his eccentricities, he's been a great CEO for Tesla. We announced the Model S, which at that time we had been working on for a couple of years, but it was still sort of secret. And I put the slide in here because this is important for CEOs and for investors. In June of 2010, the company IPO'd. We didn't have the Model S out or anything yet, but the company IPO'd, which allowed it to have access to the capital markets in a way that was really needed to get the Model S into production. And of course, now I think most people are familiar. We've got S's and X's and Model 3s and 9 billion miles of electric car driven. So that's, it's been an amazing ride. And I left during the Zev Jory time, which was, it was an incredible experience. And I have no regrets about any of it. And I just want to end with, the future will be surprising. No matter what you're doing, the future is going to be really surprising. Because if you had told me that a car that I had actually worked on was going to be blasted into space by the world's largest privately built rocket in history, and then put into orbit, and then taken from orbit and blasted off to Mars, There's just no way I would have believed you. Like, that was just so beyond anything. And yet, I watched it happen. Anyway, thank you, and have a great rest of the summer.